Hello and welcome to the International Daily Roundup. For our first story, we're speaking of Brazil, where the Supreme Court on Thursday declared that a person convicted in a case can be imprisoned only after all possibilities of appeal are exhausted. The debate, which began on October 23rd, was finalized on Thursday with a vote of 6-5 in favor of the position. This opens the door for freeing thousands of people, including the former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The debate, which began on October 23rd, was finalized today with a vote of 6-5 in favor of the position which is being expressed in the Brazilian constitution. The Supreme Court will still debate how the decision will actually be implemented in practice. There are differences of opinion if the freedom should be decreed automatically by the Supreme Court itself or evaluated by the sentencing judges case by case. After the session, Lula's defense said that they would approach the Supreme Court seeking his immediate liberty today. The decision was made in consultation with the former president. Moving on, the Chinese government has announced that it is very close to arriving at the first stage of a deal with the United States to resolve the trade war. A foreign ministry spokesperson confirmed that as a part of the first stage of the trade deal, negotiators have agreed to roll back all trade tariffs that were announced on various goods and services since 2018. Business leaders, however, are wary of the announcement, considering the history of things going awry at the 11th hour. Nevertheless, markets across the world have reacted very positively to the news. The announcement comes shortly after several US news outlets reported that the Trump administration is seriously working out mechanisms to roll back tariffs that were imposed on China, but the implementation of which has been deferred. According to reports, there is a great deal of likelihood that China will lift its moratorium on the US agricultural products in a phased-out manner as a part of the deal. Once the first phase of the deal is agreed and set, the two nations will move on to other more prickly issues like laws governing intellectual property and technology transfers in China, which were at the heart of the prolonged trade dispute which was raised by Donald Trump. By May 2019, the US had imposed exorbitant tariffs up to 25% on close to goods which were worth about $500 billion, covering almost everything which was imported from China. In the same period of time, China matched the US tariffs with counter tariffs which were worth about $110 billion, out of which $120 billion worth of US dollars were imports from the US. Moving on to our last story, Cuba has registered another very overwhelming victory against the United States in the United Nations General Assembly on November 7th. Over 191 countries voted on the resolution, which was about the need to put an end to the economic, commercial and the financial blockade which is imposed by the United States of America against the country. 187 countries voted in favor of this motion, with 3 against and 2 abstaining from the vote. The United States, Israel and Brazil were countries that voted against the resolution. Colombia and Ukraine abstained from voting. This resolution to end the blockade is not binding, that is, that it does not oblige the United States to comply with it. However, the fact that the overwhelming majority of the international community is in the favor of Cuba and against the US government is a positive and promising move for the Cuban people. After the victory, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel said, and I quote, that it is a victory of the Cuban people and of the people from across the world who accompany us in the resistance. For 28 consecutive years, since 1992, the United Nations General Assembly has approved with the increasing majority the Cuban resolution and thus demanded the lifting of the blockade that the US had imposed for 60 years from about 1960, following the revolution which was led by Fidel Castro and the nationalization of Cuban property. And with that, it's an end on this episode of the International Daily Roundup. To follow these stories, our videos and many more updates, log on to our website www.peoplesdispatch.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Thank you for watching. De pie cantar que vamos a triunfar.